Okay. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We began or resumed our study last week, beginning our fall semester in our long-form deep dive into Pirkei Avot, or as I tried to give it top billing in the temple newsletter and bulletin and what have you, the one Jewish book that will change your life. Of course, there are many Jewish books that could potentially change your life, but this is one of the ones that Jewish people have been studying for centuries and have derived perpetually relevant wisdom for life from it. I also, just in case, I do feel that it's incumbent upon me to help anyone who is new or returning after a long time away to our study to know some of the basics that we've covered previously. My framework for understanding Pirkei Avot that I think is continually helpful to remind ourselves is that this is a book by rabbis for rabbis. This is not necessarily geared at the common person. The audience appears to be specifically young adolescent males, rabbis in training, people who will go on to become respected teachers of the tradition and community officials, and function in addition to, in their teaching capacity, also in a judging capacity, invested with certain legal authority within the Jewish community, not legal authority outside of Judaism, but rather given the authority to, or invested with the authority to adjudicate matters of Jewish law and practice. Those seem to be the two primary functions of the classical rabbinate for which young men would be trained. And this book seems to operate, at least in part, as a training manual. That is sometimes a helpful frame when you get into some of these texts that appear to dispense wisdom that could be good for any person, but perhaps is specifically aimed at people who do this for a living. So we're going to look at the passage exactly where we left off. And we always just read as much as we can and have good conversation periodically as we proceed through the text. Some of what we're going to look at today I would describe as Pirkei Avot's greatest hits. Some of these may even be familiar teachings to you. Let's see what you think about that. So last week, and again, you can always watch the YouTube videos of our class. They can be a helpful refresher, or if you had to step out for a few minutes, or if you weren't able to make class, no judgment at all from me. You can always just go on to the YouTube. This is the link that Natalie circulates at the end of every week. Watch or review what we studied so that you feel like, oh yeah, there's a consistency of our conversation. So last week, we spent the entire time on Pirkei Avot chapter 5, Mishnah, which means teaching, number 19, or as it appears in this book, number 23. So again, this is one of the challenging things about when you're quoting from Pirkei Avot. You can say 523 and it doesn't line up with what everybody else's 523 is. We spent most of the time talking about the character types that are provided in that Mishnah, in that text, of Abraham representing virtue and Bilam representing vice. And that necessitated that we do a kind of deep review of not so much Abraham. I'm going on the assumption that most of us are passingly familiar with Abraham and his character and his, greatest hits as the Torah records them. Bilam required quite some unpacking and explanation. So now we're going to proceed from there. And we are at the tail end of chapter 5, which seems, according to most people whose academic credentials far exceed my own, to be a kind of random collection of aphorisms, axioms, maxims that didn't really fit logically in anywhere else. So they just kind of seem to be thrown willy-nilly into the last part of chapter 5. They don't adhere to any topical organization specifically. They also don't appear to follow the logic of the first part of chapter 5, which if you haven't looked at or want to go and review, I can commend to you on your own, or you can go back through the YouTubes, is organized around numerical mnemonic devices. Here's a list of 4 things that you should remember. Here's a list of 7. Here's a list of 3. Here's a list of 10. That seemed to govern the architecture of the most of chapter 5. Then as we get toward the last few mishnayot, the last few teachings, we lose all sense of a coherent theme or a coherent numerical device that's holding it all together. Just Rabbi's greatest hits that they didn't want you to forget. And lo and behold, some of these are indeed really memorable teachings. Okay, so we're going to look at chapter 20, at least as Sefaria designates the text. So this is actually a pretty famous text, and I'll explain where its claim to fame comes from. Allow me, please, to place it on the screen. So this is our first text of the morning. By the way, if you want to raise a hand, the best way to do that is digitally, or that's probably the best way to get my attention, or you can just put something in the chat window, either a comment or a question. Okay. I do like to do a little bit of Hebrew, not to intimidate or, vex, but rather to share my love of Hebrew with you. Yehuda, and to encourage you to feel that Hebrew is actually a more approachable language than you might have thought. Okay, Yehuda ben Tema Omer. That's pretty simple. Judah ben Tema said, Heve az kanamer. Be strong, az is strong. Heve az kanamer. Be strong as a leopard, a jungle cat. Vikal kanesher. And kal literally means light, or a great, if somewhat poetic and archaic word would be fleet. Be light or fleet or swift, as they translate here, as an eagle. Ratz katzivi, and here they use fleet for the word ratz. Ratz literally means to run. So it's another version of swift or fleet. Swift as a gazelle. The gibor, that may be a word you know, from the second prayer of the Amidah. Ata gibor leolam Adonai. There it is. Ata gibor, you are strong, Adonai. Here they have brave. A gibor is also a warrior. So the gibor ka'ari, Ari is a lion. You may know that. Some of you may even have friends named Ari. And you may be aware that the name is directly from the biblical Hebrew, meaning lion. Okay, so we have 4 animal archetypes. So we're away from using Abraham and Bilam as the thing to which a person ought be compared, or can be compared. Now to the animal world. Of course, we're well within the realm of metaphor, or simile, I guess, is even more accurate because of the use of the word like, or in Hebrew, this little letter here, the kaf, which means k, means like. Yehuda ben Tema Omer. So this rabbi says, be strong as a leopard, swift as an eagle, fleet as a gazelle, and brave as a lion. These 4 attributes, not just generally or in the abstract, but to the following specific purpose: la'asot ritzon avicha shebashamayim, to do the will. Ratzon is will, like yehi ratzon milfanecha, very, very common formula for praying. May it be your will, yehi ratzon, or yehiyu ratzon, same thing. May it be your will. Avicha, from Abba or Av, meaning your father. Sheba Shamayim, which means who is in the heavens. Let's read the rest of the text in English now. He used to say, meaning Judah ben Tema, the arrogant is headed for Gehinom. We actually talked about Gehinom last week. So if you need a recap, I will recap. Gehinom is Jewish hell. It is the Jewish term derived from the Hebrew Ge, meaning a valley, Hinom, which is a place name, referring to the southeast southwest facing slope valley just outside the old city of Jerusalem, where the biblical prophet Jeremiah informs us child sacrifice to the Canaanite fire god Molech was in fact practiced back in the day. So this ghastly practice of burning children alive as sacrificial offerings for the fire god Molech, who's a Canaanite deity, seems to have been located in a real place. I actually alluded to this at the outset of my Rosh Hashanah morning sermon, that child sacrifice, scholarly consensus is that child sacrifice was not unheard of, and that may be an understatement. It may have been widespread throughout the ancient Near East, even including ancient Israel, even though in ancient Israel, it is also very important to point out, it became a strong religious taboo. But this is a real place, but in Jewish memory, Jewish collective memory, Jewish imagination, or Jewish literature, Gehinom, sometimes condensed even further down to the word Gehenna, is the stand-in for what we, meaning we, the Jewish tradition, Jewish people, refers to in our framework of hell. And I had to say all of that kind of disclaimery language around the word hell, because the last thing I want to call up is the notion of the Christian hell. However, the similarities override the differences in this passage. The arrogant is headed for Gehinom. The arrogant is going to hell. It is a perfectly acceptable substitute translation. And the blushing for the Garden of Eden. Blushing is a little, I would call it hyper literal. The actual word is boshet panim, literally those of ashamed faces, right? If you can express shame, then you are designated for the heavenly abode, for Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, which is Jewish heaven. So again, and we talked a lot about afterlife stuff last week. I've also taught a long-form class on views of death and afterlife, and I think that most of those classes are also uploaded to my YouTube channel. If you want to go way, way back, you can view our previous classes from a couple years ago on texts and teachings about death, afterlife, and immortality within Judaism. Boshet panim means the ability to express shame. They are designated for heaven. We'll finish the text and then I'll start taking some thoughts and questions. Yehi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Eloheinu. That is a prayer formula, as I said a few minutes ago. May it be the will of Adonai, our God, shetivneh, which, by the way, the fact that this is in Pirkei Avot is really unusual. This doesn't pop up very much in Pirkei Avot, is direct prayer language, except in the places in the Mishnah where, well, elsewhere in the Mishnah where the Mishnah is teaching how to offer prayers, this may pop up. But it is strange that we've moved from a kind of teaching framework to a prayer framework. So may it be God's will, so a direct address to God, our God, Adonai Eloheinu, shetivneh ircha b'mehera v'yameinu, that God may rebuild swiftly your city, v'tein chelkenu b'toratecha, and give our portion to, or make our portion the study of Torah. It's a very strange ending. To my mind, I can't think of another Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that does this, that stops teaching at the word Gan Eden and ends with a prayer, which is, again, in a traditional formula and even uses phrases that are found in the Siddur, in other prayers. May it be your will, Adonai our God, that you will swiftly rebuild your city in our time and make our portion in the, it doesn't actually say the study of Torah. It just says, grant our portion in your Torah. We'll talk about what that last passage is doing there. The short answer is I don't know, but we'll try to figure it out. So now I'm open to acknowledging hands and questions. I see my dad or mom's hand is up, so you guys can unmute, please.
I wanted to call attention to Avicha Sheba Shamayim, which sounds like a phrase we haven't encountered before, and to my ear sounds Christian. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, et cetera, et cetera. So I wonder if, what you think of that insertion of Father who is in heaven as a way of talking about Adonai.
So great. Good ear, good eye. Avicha Sheba Shamayim, your Father who is in heaven. Sometimes in the Siddur, there are prayers that begin Avinu Sheba Shamayim. It is an early rabbinic form of address to God. The Christians got it from us. When Jesus in the New Testament, that's what Christians call their Christian scripture and what I call Christian scripture. But in what Christians call the New Testament, Jesus is quoted as I don't remember where this first appears. I think it's in the gospel material. Maybe it's one of the Pauline texts, which are usually epistles, letters from the Apostle Paul to different communities to whom he is missionizing or evangelizing. He says, and when you pray, pray the way Jesus did. Pray as the Christ prayed. And then he provides what is known in Christian practice as the Lord's Prayer. Whether the Lord's actually means it is a form of address to God, which I think is the original meaning, or as it is probably mistakenly passed into conventional understanding, the prayer of the Lord, meaning by Jesus in your Christian framework, is not really the most important thing for us to figure out today. What is important to know is that the Lord's Prayer is a fascinating text that is believed to be one of the older textual units that gets picked up in the early Christian tradition that comes directly out of a Jewish milieu. So it is a little bit challenging for us as modern readers or modern hearers, listeners, to hear a phrase like our Father who art in heaven, or in the Hebrew, Avinu Sheba Shamayim, or here, Avicha Sheba Shamayim, your Father who is in heaven, and not hear the Lord's Prayer echoing. But what we believe the Lord's Prayer to be is an ancient liturgy. Liturgy is just a word for prayer language, or a set of prayers, known in scholarly circles as a doxology, doxology, which is Greek for words of praise. So, for instance, the Kedusha prayer, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzebaot, and all of the liturgy surrounding that biblical text from Isaiah that we say at every morning service, that is a doxology. It is a liturgy of praise. The most famous doxology that all of us in this room know is the Kaddish, which isn't only the mourner's Kaddish. The Kaddish, which literally means sanctification, is a litany or a liturgy of praise to God. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Magnified and sanctified be the name of God. Be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, in this world as it shall be in worlds to come. It is a long form of praise that is probably a sibling prayer of the prayer that becomes the Lord's Prayer. All of this by way of saying that if Jesus is in fact accurately being quoted as having recited this particular prayer, known today as the Lord's Prayer, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is on heaven, many scholars have observed the similarities between the Lord's Prayer and the mourner's Kaddish and other doxologies or liturgies of praise to God. So if indeed that is the authentic origin of the tradition, it almost doesn't matter whether or not Jesus came up with it. In fact, the likely scenario is that Jesus didn't come up with it. Jesus prayed in a way that was conventional for the milieu in which he was operating. And that, combined with the fact that numerous passages throughout the Christian scriptures, again, what our friends in Christianity call the New Testament, is referred to as a rabbi, further corroborates that Jesus actually comes from a milieu that is directly comparable to the milieu in which Pirkei Avot and the Mishnah generally was produced, edited, redacted, compiled, what have you. That's a really long answer to a short question, but I think it's a great question. It's fascinating, and I appreciate that you're attentive to that nuance or that little linguistic formula of "Our Father who art in heaven." I'm now trying to think of what prayers in the Siddur today use that formula. The one I know offhand is the prayer for the state of Israel, but ironically, that's a modern prayer. That was written post 1948. Don't ask me exactly when. I don't know. I'm sure it's Googleable. But Avinu Shebashamayim, Sur Yisrael v'Goalo, Our Father who art in heaven, Rock, Sur Yisrael, Rock of Israel, v'Goalo, and its Redeemer, Barech et Midinat Yisrael, bless the state of Israel, Reshit Smichat Geulatenu, the first flowering of our redemption. That's how the prayer begins. So modern rabbis who wrote that prayer sometime post 1948 used the formula of Our Father who art in heaven, maybe even as a deliberate attempt, though this is purely speculation on my part, so please don't quote me as saying anything definitive here, possibly to reclaim it from Christian origins in the name of the newly born state of Israel, which would really be a fascinating move if it is, as I suspect, like most things in prayer language, very intentional, deliberate. Okay. Michelle Braun, you have a hand up, please.
I got a few things, so let me dump them all right now instead of trying to come back. First of all, Shabbat Shamayim is in the Echad Meyodea from the Haggadah.
Right, okay. Shabbat Shamayim, Uva Aretz. That's the first line which gets repeated because it becomes the chorus of the song.
Right.
In Who Knows One, I Know One, One is our Father, One is our God in heaven and on earth.
We have... I think we could probably endlessly, and I see that the rabbis have, parse specific attributes of the leopard, the eagle, gazelle, and the lion to distinguish them to the extent we want to. And I suspect they would all be entirely speculative. And in that regard, I did dig up finally 2 years after we moved a beautiful copy of the Pirkei Avot that I'm looking at, which has a commentary from a Joseph ben Judah ibn Aknin, 1160 to 1226, that says, a student ought to be strong as a leopard and not be ashamed to ask questions in the course of study. If he has not understood something, let him not say, I have understood. Or if his teacher taught him something once, twice, or 3 times, and he still did not understand, let him say to his master, teach it to me once again, etc. And the text, specific Mishnah text in general, with all of its different comments and commentaries, reinforced by all of the different, gives me hope for our continuing practice of reinterpretation and arguing back, right? And questioning, maybe not arguing, but questioning and challenging and asking for further explanations.
Love that.
My third item is simply that at the end, when you get to the, which you commented as being sort of unusual, may it be thy will, O Lord, rebuild the city as speedily in our days, etc. There is a comment here from a Rabbi Menachem ben Solomon HaMeiri, 1249 to 1306.
Yeah, unlike the first rabbi you referenced, the Meiri is I would say kind of like medieval rabbis,
right, and it says
roster of greats.
also facing it says this sentence may have been the concluding words of our treatise originally.
Right.
The subsequent statements may have been added later. So that, in fact, structurally, as the end of a chapter, it would simply make sense. And then somebody added some more text later.
Exactly right. Yeah. And I really think that logically suggests itself. So working, first of all, thank you for the first two comments. And on the subject of the last comment, I think that's precisely the point, that this appears to be the way in which the rabbis would have ended a teaching, right? A master teaching. I mean, and it's kind of a meta text because it ends on the note of studying Torah. So if you go back and like you, which is kind of the whole point, right? So a couple of thoughts, first of all. This text, the business about being strong as the leopard and swift as the gazelle, these four animals, brave as the lion and fleet as the eagle. I'm mixing up the order in which they appear and probably the adjectives as well, but you get the idea. This becomes the kind of epigram, the front piece to the original draft of the Shulchan Aruch, the 15th century master code of Jewish law that to this very day, I mean, you know, October 20th, 2022, provides the definitive basis for Jewish law and practice. And the Shulchan Aruch is really the master code of Jewish law. It is first prepared in the 15th century and then is revised again in the 16th century. There are different editions of it for both the Ashkenazic and Sephardic Jewish communities of their time. And it's not as if it has the definitive last word on every jot and tittle of Jewish law and practice, but for all intents and purposes, it kind of does. Everything that modern Orthodoxy today upholds as normative Jewish practice is either directly from or paraphrasing from or an abbreviated version of what is taught in the Shulchan Aruch, as opposed to the Talmud, right, which is this voluminous commentary on the Mishnah itself. The Mishnah, the original 6 volumes, like some of this we recapped last week because I kept holding up my Alkali Mishnah, Alkali being the editor of the Hebrew 6-volume set that you see me kind of proudly displaying from my bookshelf in the office. I'm zooming from home today. I don't have it here. The Mishnah is a 6-volume, each volume called a Seder, or an order, set of topically arranged approaches to how to live a Jewish life in what the original readers must have thought was excruciating detail. But the original readers weren't around for what came next, which was the development of the Talmud, which is a super commentary on the Mishnah, where on every page of Talmud, you might have a little bit of Mishnah, maybe a few lines or so, or even a single line, and then expansive elaboration of the points that are made in the Mishnah, often arguing with or against them, bringing in new perspectives, in some cases overriding them, in some cases upholding them. This will fill 3 shelves of a library, or my office at work has a full set of, Talmud, Babylonian Talmud. It's vast. You'll spend your whole life studying it, and you might come away not having a definitive understanding of, okay, rabbis, what do I actually do if I want to live a Jewish life? Thank you for recording your conversations and your viewpoints. But so the post-Talmudic era, from say the year 800, this is oversimplifying, but to the present day, we'll say, has largely been an effort to streamline the teaching of the Talmud into digestible codes of law. The Talmud is often mistakenly referred to as a law code. It is not a law code. A law code presents you with laws that you can easily understand and follow. The Talmud does not do that. It often leaves its legal principles or arguments completely unresolved. Cantor Kleiman actually talked about this in her Yom Kippur Kol Nidre remarks. She says, when the Talmud wants to just let an issue stand, it'll just finish a dialogue or a debate with the word teku, which means let this stand, unresolved. Like, thank you. We've heard from all the sides. We've heard from the different rabbis about their opinions about some matter of Jewish law or practice. Now we move on to the next subject. The Jew in the pew might say, but Rabbi, tell me what to do. So along comes first Maimonides, who writes the Mishnah Torah, which basically means the second Torah. Maimonides had, let's say, high self-regard. So, let's make this simpler for the Jews in the pews. But the most famous of all the codes is the Shulchan Aruch. And interestingly, the Shulchan Aruch, if you open it to the title page, has this phrase at it: be strong as a leopard, swift as an eagle, fleet as a gazelle, and brave as a lion, to do the will of Avicha Shebashamayim, of your father. Yeah, probably not great to gender neutralize that, just because we want to preserve what the original sense of it was. Your father who is in heaven. He used to say, Judah ben Tema, who's not really much is known about him. He is described elsewhere as a master of the Mishnah. He's a fourth generation rabbinic sage, and apparently either, I think, a teacher of or a disciple of Judah Hanasi, who is the final compiler of the Mishnah, but not much else is known about this guy. He used to say the arrogant is, so let's just stop with the animals. This is very interesting, I think, these animal comparisons, because unlike, for instance, comparing to Abraham, comparing to even Bilam the wicked, there's something almost animistic or pagan about the framework here, about using animals. It's one commentary I read said this even feels more like something you might hear in Greek philosophy. To my mind, this is the only place in which this almost folkloric frame is deployed in Pirkei Avot. And it does a little bit of like a curveball at the end of the phrase: be strong as a leopard, swift as an eagle, fleet as a gazelle, brave as a lion. If I just stopped there and asked a group of kids to fill in the blank, with in order that you might, or so that, ... No kid is going to say so that you can be good at studying Torah, right? That's not what comes to mind when you think about these wild animals, right? And these are animals that inspire awe, admiration. I have a friend right now who is on safari in Africa, and she's posting daily on Facebook some of her close encounters of the animal kind. And she actually saw a cheetah, which is very rare because they're hard to catch in the wild because they're so very fast. They can run up to 80 miles an hour on land. It's amazing. There are wildebeest. There are little elephant families with baby elephants. She's putting cutesy music next to them. What else has she seen? Lions, leopards, no eagles yet. I saw a hawk about a block from where I live the other day swoop down on the front lawn of a property while I was taking a walk. It was unbelievable. It was trying to get a squirrel. And that's what hawks do. We've found some eviscerated bunny entrails on our lawn a few times, and there are hawks in this part of the world. So we suspect that they were turned into lunch. Anyway, animals like this inspire a kind of, let's just say a dramatic emotional reaction, which you don't associate with doing the thing that Rabbi Judah ben Tema says they are supposed to remind you to do, which is go study Torah. Any other thoughts on just the first part of the text? And then we'll talk about that prayer that ends it. That at least was my observation, that there's kind of this clever twist on what you would associate just instinctively with wild animals, and then say, aha, but be like a wild animal in the service of Torah. Rob and Aaron, nice to see both of you here. Just unmute yourself, please.
I guess I also just see it as like a purity of intent. So wild animals, they're strong. They may kill bunnies, but they don't kill bunnies for the sake of killing bunnies. They do it because it's instinctual for survival. They have so that's kind of how I interpreted it. So study Torah with just purity of intent. It's not about being the best Torah studier or better than someone else. It's just about doing it for the for doing it, really.
Yeah, doing it because you needed to survive. Actually, you said for survival. That's not far off the mark, right? That if Torah study could be to you like an animal needs air and water, and you know, kind of is seen in pursuit of food, that's actually a really fascinating understanding of the imagery, which I love. Obviously, there's no right or wrong answer here, but I appreciate that insight very much. Joe Levine, please.
The imagery of the animals made me think of drawing attention to all of God's creatures and maybe gaining respect for that. And then a question I had about the use of the not quotation, but the new use of the words God in heaven.
Yeah.
We could constantly discuss back and forth a Torah study, whether God is at one place or is he every place, or is he in every one of us? And he's down here living amongst us,
right,
and guiding us in all our thoughts and our actions.
Yeah, thank you for that. It is pretty clear to me, although it is not consistent with my personal belief. But again, you know, we don't come to study just so you can hear the rabbi's own theology. I try to pepper my insights into the text with occasional personal reflections of where I stand theologically, or how I relate to the text. And I hope that is not to monopolize that dimension of our learning, but rather to encourage you to do the same, right? The text should be not just a guide to Jewish life and practice, but the text should, even more than being a guide, it should be a goad. It should be something that pushes us toward deeper insight and reflection into our own relationship with God, Torah, and Israel. Israel meaning the Jewish people or the Jewish tradition, not just the land of Israel. For me, one thing that emerges from this, and again, this is not a personal reflection, is that I think authentically first century Judaism, second century Judaism, or even BCE, early proto-rabbinic Judaism of the time of before Jesus, but you have master sages like Hillel and Shammai who live in the first century BCE. Clearly, we've moved out of the kind of Israelite religion that the Torah itself comes to describe. By the time that the Mishnah is written, God is firmly located in the heavens. And a lot of Jewish imagination and practice both has been leading up to that and is reinforced, that way of thinking about God as up, beyond, is solidified by the time of the Mishnah and reinforced in the Talmud. It is not, of course, the only way in which rabbinic Judaism relates to God and the image of God. That would be much too reductionist. And by the time you get to Maimonides, God is completely dephysicalized. But remember, Maimonides is the 1200s. So Maimonides is the one who says God has no body, God has no form. God, if you asked Maimonides, what is God? He would have said, God is the active intelligence of the world. That's how Maimonides related to God. It's kind of hard to have a relationship with an active intelligence. But for Maimonides, a human relationship with God exists purely up here. Like communing with the intelligence of the world, that's how one experiences God in Maimonides. Last week, I did a rooftop session in White Plains for some members of the congregation who happen to live at 10 City Place. I think we might have one or two of you here today, where we talked about the mystical or the Hasidic, the Kabbalistic approach to God. Very different. It's a God that can actually be felt and experienced right here and now on earth through various modalities of prayer, meditation, study, chanting, use of psychotropic substances. I mean, there are lots of different ways to get in a God experience. For the ancient rabbis, certainly at the time of the Mishnah, the early rabbinic period, so let's say the year 0 to the year 235, which is when, give or take, we think the Mishnah was completed, compiled, redacted. Those first 2.5 centuries of Jewish life, corresponding not coincidentally with the rise of early Christianity, because they are sister religions. Everybody says, well, Judaism is the mother or the parent tradition of Christianity. That is sort of true. It is not true. It is true in the sense that there was a substrate of biblical Israelite religion, which becomes Judaism, which gives rise to the early Christian church, and without which Christianity would look very different then as now. It is more true, however, that rabbinic Judaism and Christianity are sibling religions, both branching off of the common root of Judaism. And even that isn't exactly true, because Christianity is much more heavily influenced by Greco-Roman paganism than Judaism ever was. Judaism really insulated itself against much pagan influence, viewing it as perilous for the survival of the Jewish people, and associated with people who wanted to do us harm. So there's that too. So you get to this Avinu Sheba Shamayim, this jarring phrase, at least for us as Jews who affiliate with a Reform congregation in the first part of the 21st century. And we're looking at Avinu Sheba Shamayim, our Father who art in heaven. First of all, my dad says, boy, that sounds like the Lord's Prayer from the New Testament. I'm like, it sure does. It's just that they got it from us and made it more famous. And then you have Joe saying, our Father who art in heaven. Even just the way in which God is envisaged as above or in heaven runs counter to other understandings that you've picked up from your extensive participation in our Saturday morning Torah study community. You know well that that is certainly not the last or even the definitive understanding or image of God. However, and this is the summary of everything I've just said for the last 5 minutes, it is consistent with early rabbinic Judaism. God above, humankind below. And I think the temple, which stood in Jerusalem, was sort of the, I'm trying to come up with a word from like sci-fi here. It was the...
Maybe a time portal?
Yeah, like a portal.
Yeah.
But not time though, space. It was the portal that allowed God to be accessed here on earth and for human or Jewish aspirations to reach God above. And you needed the temple as like this portal to link God's realm with the earthly realm. This doesn't just come out of nowhere. As early as some of the earliest traditions in the Torah refer to practices of sacrifices and offerings. And I would not be the first to observe that the image of smoke going up from an altar into the sky, producing this kind of fragrant cloud, whether it is burning the actual meat of the sacrifice or a grain offering, or more likely also enveloped in a cloud of sacred incense, which was required for all of the biblical sacrifices in the ancient temple. And the Torah even puts the use of incense in the old tabernacle, the kind of proto-temple that was carried throughout the wilderness wanderings of the Israelites. That cloud of incense, that column of smoke going up, the idea that God's interaction with the sacrifice was through the sense of smell. It would say God would smell the pleasing aroma, and that's how God was propitiated through the act of humans performing sacrifices. That whole image of a cloud of smoke going up, I think, is a precursor to an embodied deity in the heavens, or may even be directly related. Like, why would that be the thing you do to reach God if you didn't have some notion that God was above or beyond? The fact that Christianity much, much further develops these notions of heaven and hell in elaborate detail, and much, not just Christian literature, but especially Christian art and iconography, just goes nuts with the physical embodiments of heaven and hell. Judaism never really takes that direction, right? But at least at this point in history, in the first few centuries of the Common Era, you can see that there's commonality of imagery around where is God, where are we, What happens when we die? Do you go up? Do you go down? What does it look like to go up? Again, we don't get into red leotard wearing, pitchfork wielding, goatee sporting devil, Satan. That's not Jewish. But it's not that far off from what this text is proposing. Now, here's what's interesting. The use of Gehenna, the down there, and Shamayim, but they don't say Shamayim, they actually say Gan Eden. God is in the Shamayim, and human beings who have certain attributes go to Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. But it's definitely a paradise notion. But the qualities that get you there, as described in this text, are fascinating. It's not just abstract, be a good person, you go up, be a bad person, you go down. Do you remember? I'm not putting the text on the screen just to see how well you remember what we learned, because it can get obscured by leopards and lions and tigers and bears, oh my. So what are the qualities that, Dad, you want to chime in here?
The comment that I was going to make was, since you commented on the function of the temple, until the rabbinic age, it was the source of employment for the Kohanim and the Levites.
Right. And thank you. You reminded me, I was going to say, well, the rabbis are grappling with a Jewish commonwealth, a Jewish civilization that now has basically been decapitated. Its religious officials have been stripped of rank, left without a institutional focus or institution at which they would serve, which was the locus or the center point, the focal point of the entire community, which was the ancient temple, the priestly cult, the ritual practices. All of that is now gone. There are vestiges, of course, but mostly what the rabbis are invested in, and this is actually going to take us, we have to hold this thought, so I'm really glad you mentioned it. This is going to take us to the kind of substitute modalities of Jewish practice that now will supplant cultic and temple worship with a priesthood at the center of the Jewish chain of authority. All of that is gone. So the rabbinic community, the rabbinic way of practicing and learning Judaism is really a Judaism 2.0. I'm even go so far as to say rabbinic Judaism is Judaism. Everything that came before, temple cult, this is not an academic term that I've ever seen before, but I just call it biblical Israelite religion, because it's not the same. Most of what we do as Jews is Judaism 2.0 or rabbinic Judaism. It is not biblical Israelite religion. Case in point, you might say, how is that possible? The Torah is our holy book. That's what's in the Ark. Okay, I hear you. But tell me what you did on Passover last year, and don't talk about Zoom. That's not what I mean. You did not. I'm gonna go out on a limb. You did not take a lamb, slaughter it in your backyard, and eat it with your staff in your hand, sandals on your feet, ready to leave your house at any minute. I'm just guessing that's not what you did, even though that's what Exodus chapter 12 tells you have to do on Passover night. You had a thing called a Seder. The Seder is much, much later, 300 of the Common Era. It's post-Mishnaic, by the way. Even the Mishnah doesn't have all of the rules and regulations down for the Seder. It has proto-Seder stuff. It does have 4 cups of wine. It has questions. The questions aren't the same ones you have. Some are the same, some are different. It doesn't have Chad Gadya. It doesn't have Echad Mi Yodea, the song that Michelle Braun referenced earlier today. Because the Seder is Judaism. And what they did in Bible times is not Judaism. It's proto-Judaism. Okay. What are the qualities that get you into heaven and hell? Jewish heaven and Jewish hell. Do you remember? Trish?
So the qualities are arrogance gets.
Oh, I'm sorry. I muted you by accident. Unmute yourself again. My bad. I meant to lower your hand. Sorry. Start over. My bad.
Arrogance gets you sent south. And blushing, or as you described it, ability to express shame gets you back into the garden. So to me, it sounds like what gets you back is remembering what got kicked you out and what got you kicked out in the first place.
Right. So shamelessness is the quality associated with punishment in the hereafter. And the ability to experience and express shame is definitively, in this text at least, the quality that merits entry into the paradise hereafter. That is a very Jewish notion, by the way. That is just like Jewish guilt 101, right? The idea that, but this is one of the many things I love about this particular Mishnah, this particular text. These are qualities that the four animals that have been referenced at the beginning in no way, shape, or form can experience. I mean, I'm taking Aaron's point and running with it like a leopard. The gazelle is the one that runs. An animal eats its prey, has no instinct to, has no concept, nor should they, of sin, of remorse, of shame. Everything they do is shameless. Whereas the human being, it is exactly the opposite. So again, there's this funny left turn or curveball that happens in the middle of this text. You think it's going in one direction with the analogies to the leopard, the lion, the gazelle, and the eagle, again, not in that order. And then the next thing you know, we're talking about very distinctive human characteristics that, well, really what makes you a human or a Jew is your readiness to learn Torah and your ability to feel remorse or express shame. Something that your animal nature is incapable of. And I think that the rabbis are deeply attuned to a great dilemma of human life, which Darwin and science since Darwin would reinforce, which is that we are animals. But we're not like any other animal. That at least is a Jewish framework. How much are we animals? How much are we organisms? How much are we simply creatures of appetite and instinct and survival? And how much are we spiritual beings? And this whole idea of like the spiritual being is encapsulated by one differentiating factor between a human being and an animal, which is the ability to feel and experience and express shame or remorse. And a spiritual hereafter awaits those who are thus differentiated.
I have a question.
Go for it, Judy.
I have a question. I think I'm not sure I'm on the right track. If I recall from last week, people are hopefully like Abraham, with a humble mind and a lowly spirit and a good eye. And I was so impressed by Russell's good eye. It was a wonderful interpretation.
Yeah, Russell has a good eye for literature, by the way. Go on.
It was wonderful. And I'm just wondering if that is more in tune, quote unquote, who would get to heaven if they're, whatever, versus necessarily all the animal traits, although they can help you get where you're going faster. So I'm thinking that more than necessarily our animal traits might be those that are more Abraham-like, for want of a better word.
Right. Yeah, no, I think absolutely. And it's clear to me why the compilers or the redactors of the Mishnah, Pirkei Avot specifically, put these texts side by side, because that's the link. I did say this is sort of a random assemblage of loose ends at the end of chapter 5. And by the way, all of chapter 6. Chapter 6, there's no organizing principle. The best operating theory we have is that this was the end, which is why it ends on a prayer. And then everything that comes after it is just odds and ends. It's like, oh, we don't want to throw these out. They don't belong topically anywhere else in the Mishnah. Let's stick them in Pirkei Avot because, like much of Pirkei Avot, they are axioms for living a life that is good. So yeah, I think the idea of the qualities of Abraham, which are also ticket to entry into the hereafter, though the language is slightly different, are exactly the kind of thing, the hook on which the rabbis who compiled the Mishnah would hang this Mishnah. Say, oh, and while we're talking about qualities of human beings that can either merit you to get into Gan Eden or consign you to the, to the place where the wicked go, Gehenna or Gehinom. While we're on that subject, here's another teaching that we have. This wonderful teaching about leopards and eagles and gazelles and lions. which are not behaving like leopard. No leopard studies Torah. So the whole, again, it's this really fun, self-paradoxical text. And then we're going to talk finally about the last line. So the prayer, of course, is, we've said from a structural standpoint, the prayer is the tip-off, the giveaway that this is somehow an ending, that we're no longer in teaching mode. We are now, as a rabbinic community, we're going to enter prayer mode. And the two things that are stated in this final line, and I'll bring it back up on screen so that you can be reminded, are: one, may God rebuild the temple. Shows you where the rabbis are. I'm not sure how sincere they are about that. Judaism is replete for the last 2,000 years with prayers to rebuild the temple, but to do that would put the rabbis out of a job. So, okay, there's that. Like, I, for one, am in the camp of rabbis who don't want the temple rebuilt, particularly not by religious nut jobs who, even this very day, are plotting ways to blow up the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque so that God can rebuild the temple on the Temple Mount. There are people with such dangerous and extreme ideologies, by the way. There's a fascinating book. It's a novel. It's purely speculative, by Robert Stone, called Damascus Gate. It came out at least 20 years ago, I think, which was about this. It was about a cult of Jewish religious fanatics plotting to blow up the Temple Mount, the Muslim shrines on the Temple Mount, so that the third temple could be built, in keeping with 2,000 years of Jewish prayer and aspiration. Okay, anyway, that's a sidebar. Let's take it at face value. May it be the will, may it be your will, Adonai our God, that your city be rebuilt speedily. Here it's city, not even temple. City, of course, Jerusalem. And so this is interesting. They could have ended there. This is almost like, but in the meantime, our portion will not be land, we're going to de-physicalize our relationship with Judaism or biblical Israelite religion. This is a definitive statement that in our rabbinic way of practicing and our rabbinic faith, the study of Torah is the way in which we encounter the divine. It is the substitute for Jerusalem and temple, at least as I read this. And then it ties you back to the beginning, which is that, okay, the whole, the leopard, eagle, gazelle, lion thing is actually just a fake out. It really is just a metaphorical way of saying how, I love what Aaron said earlier today, how studying Torah should be as natural to you and as important to you as your survival. That's what this is about. Like, you should go after it like an animal would go after its prey or its food or needs air and water. And then, of course, back to the study of Torah at the end. Because that's all we have now. We don't have a temple. We don't have a city. We have a book or books. Okay, the next Mishnah. This one is so famous and so venerated in Jewish tradition that I'm going to ask one of the more famous and venerated members of our Torah study community, Joe Levine. May I ask you to read this text? He used to say, this is attributed to Judah ben Tema. You just have to unmute yourself, but I think you'll enjoy doing this. And I would enjoy having you read it for the community.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the honor. He used to say, at 5 years of age, the study of scripture. At 10, the study of Mishnah. At 13, subject to the commandments. At 15, study of Talmud. At 18, the bridal canopy. At 20, for the pursuit of livelihood. At 30, the peak of strength. At 40, wisdom. At 50, able to give counsel. At 60, old age. At 70, full of years. At 80, the age of strength. At 90, a bent body. At 100, as good as dead and gone completely out of the world.
Okay, this does not follow the standard rabbinic practice of ending on what we call a nechemta, or a note of comfort. Quite the opposite. All right, but what is this here? I mean, this is, again, some of you may be familiar with this, because I would put this not just in Pirkei Avot's greatest hits, but in Judaism's greatest hits. It's a very famous teaching about the ages and stages of life through a uniquely rabbinic lens, a uniquely Jewish lens. And it's basically saying at each of these ages, we associate or identify each of these ages with of a human life with different abilities, attributes, and accomplishments. 3 A words: abilities, attributes, and accomplishments. So what stands out to you? You can take this in any order you want. Like, what are you noticing about this? And of course, please remember that life expectancy at this time was like, 40 something, maybe. Generally, that's for the general population, based on what we know from, old bones. Life expectancy was not, you were not expected to live into your 80s the way you are today. Rob and Aaron, please.
I realize this is a very modern way to look at it, but what strikes me is that you're supposed to get married before you're capable of supporting yourself or having any wisdom or ability to, like, I see give counsel as basically like higher order thought. Like, you've moved on from your adolescence, and that is very striking to me. But I realize I'm looking at it through a 2022 lens.
I appreciate both your insight into the text and what strikes you, and also your disclaimer that, yes, we have to be careful about imposing 21st century American viewpoints on a first or second or third century Israelite, or not Israelite, but Near Eastern text. And this, by the way, continues to be normative in the Haredi, or the ultra-Orthodox world, right? Where the emphasis on marriage and family and the order of events seems to take precedence over livelihood and having a job that will actually allow you to feed your family. So that's interesting and noteworthy. Joe, I see you want to continue your thought, Aaron?
Well, also, it's not just that, but it's what we know about the maturity to support the family. It's not just financial, it's also emotional and psychological. Like at 18, and you and I have talked about this, like this was part of the reason that I have struggled with the whole thing.
Thank you. That's really, powerful insight, that if you're only able to give advice when you're 40 or no, 50, I'm not even there yet. That's too bad, because I give a lot of counsel in my job. Thank you. Joe, and then Barbara, please. Oh, Joe, just unmute kindly. There you go.
I know they're just words, and it's not, these are not absolutes, but I was interested in them mentioning that at 40 is when you gain wisdom. Yeah. That means all the teachers who are teaching the first 20 years of their experience are teaching without wisdom. I doubt that's true.
Well, yeah, right. Of course, and things don't actually just magically happen on years that end in a 0 or a 5.
Right.
Having said that, there is a difference between knowledge and wisdom, right? And there's nothing wrong with teachers who are phenomenally gifted at communicating knowledge, but there is a special quality to a person who embodies wisdom. I think of the qualities of wisdom and knowledge as really, really distant from each other. I'm not even convinced that there's any kind of logical linkage between knowing a lot and being wise. But that's a comment for either today or another day. Barbara, please chime in.
I'm curious at the last sentence, uvatel. To me, uvatel is a much stronger word, not almost like you're disagreeing with everything that's possible and you're throwing it out. I mean, in the Hebrew, I don't know if it's more modern Hebrew, uvatel, or the way that they have it here, but it's definitely, the word itself is much stronger than gone completely out of the world.
Yeah, how do you use the word batel in modern Hebrew, Barbara?
Yeah, right. You can possibly disagree with everything. You're throwing everything out.
Right. Batel is literally in modern Hebrew, batel is the verb that means to cancel.
Right.
Invalidate.
Right.
Right. To annul.
Right. That's the word I was looking for. Yes.
Annul is a great, and by the way, that's not just a modern Hebrew thing. That's the meaning of the word. Like it is as if you don't exist. You are annulled.
Right. But it's not gone completely from the world. It's much stronger than that.
Right. Thank you. Good. It's really nice to have you in class, by the way, with your Hebrew acumen to notice such things.
Well, I'm one of yours now. I teach with you now.
I know. I'm so happy that you are bringing our students into a little bit of a deeper relationship with the Hebrew language that you love. Other things that you plural class noticed about this text that stood out for you? I mean, many of us have lived to attain many of the milestones here, at least in terms of our chronologies of life. Arlene, please.
Yes. Well, I thought it was interesting that a 5-year-old would be studying scripture and a 10-year-old Mishnah. And also the fact that it seemed as if an age limit was put on these items that one would engage in. It's not something that I feel was even appropriate to ascribe an age level to, and I'm not sure what the reason for that.
Right. I mean, I'm not sure it is necessarily implied that just because the study of scripture, Tanakh, and the word for scripture here, by the way, is mikra, which literally means, the thing you read, but scripture is usually what it means. So it means the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, the Tanakh. That doesn't mean you stop, right? I'm not sure that any of these say that you have to stop, though, if you are bent over or annulled from the world, it's going to be hard for you to get up every day and study Torah. And again, you notice the hook on which they're hanging this text is directly related to the thing that came before it is, okay, here we have a text that is fundamentally actually not about leopards and eagles, it's about studying Torah. And it's about the centrality of Torah in the Jewish experience or the Jewish project, right? For the rabbis, if the biblical predecessors in the authority chain of Judaism to the rabbis were the priests, the Kohanim, who presided over the cult at the temple in Jerusalem, then the focal point of Jewish life for the rabbis is, of course, Torah. Torah is everything. So this, too, is largely a text about where does Torah figure in? And, well, it figures prominently. And Torah, meaning not just the 5 books of Moses, but accumulated Jewish wisdom. And even at this point, the rabbis recognize, wow, we have a fairly substantial Jewish sacred library. We got to start early. If you're only going to get 40 or 50 years, we especially have to make sure that our youth are indoctrinated in the ways of Torah and become competent in Torah at a very young age. And to this day, traditional, that is to say, Orthodox Jewish practice, is to introduce children to Torah very, very young. Right? Pretty much as soon as you're able to read, you should be studying. You should be studying scripture. Mishnah almost feels like a self-promoting kind of statement here. It's like, and then once you've developed basic Torah skills, when you're 10, we're going to get you studying our book. Right? You don't waste much time. By the time a child has basic critical reasoning skills, 5th grade or so, and is capable, start reading Mishnah. I actually feel like I'm probably, in that group of kids who would have enjoyed being introduced to Mishnah as a kid. It isn't that hard a book. Truly, it isn't that hard a book. You can teach this material, at least some of it. And Pirkei Avot, obviously, like all great literature, it means something different when you approach it as an adult than as a kid. But, a lot of the Mishnah is just how to do Judaism. Those of you who've been studying Mishnah with me since the very beginning of this course of study, 2 or more years ago, I think 2.5 years ago, we started with Mishnah Shabbat. We started with Mishnah Brachot, which is all about the art and practice of blessing. And the very first thing that the Mishnah asks is, what time of day do you say the Shema? That's a question that a 10-year-old can actually handle. And how do you know? When it says when you lie down and when you rise up, well, is that 8 p.m. or 10 p.m.? Or does it have to do with the sun? Those of you who've been with me from the very beginning, you may recall what the rabbi's answer is. You recite Shema in the morning, at least, at the time that you can distinguish between the colors blue and white, the land from the sea, or the land from the sky, or possibly blue from green. In other words, where there's more light. That's later in the day. When there's enough light to tell blue from green, there's also a thread of blue in your tzitzis, in your tzitzit of your talis. So if you can tell the blue thread from the white thread, time to get up. If everything is still too dark, you don't have to say the Shema yet. In other words, time in the Jewish imagination is not actually a fixed thing that has to do with the planet's position or the planet's, rotation. It actually has to do with Jewish practice itself. How do we know what time it is? Look at your tzitzit. That's your clock. Like everything, even how you count minutes, hours, days, it's all embedded in your Jewish practice. I'm just saying that as that's the conversation I would have with adults, but a 10-year-old can read that text for sure. Okay, Mom, Dad, then Judy Gross, please.
That catalog of the ages left off the age that many of us have reached of the 50th reunion and plus, which is the age of, you look great.
Yeah. Yes, it did. It does, however, here's interesting. It does say that 60 is old age. And again, the word for old age is not a nice phrase in English, which is why the Hebrew is helpful. It says, in Hebrew, it says, ben shishim lazikna, which is a term of much greater veneration. Zikna is a term of esteem in both the Bible and the rabbinic mind. So at 60, you reach a certain stage of being. The very first person in the Torah to be called old is actually Abraham. And it says, Abraham Zaken. Now, Abraham had become old. And this is the story that introduces us to the forthcoming birth of Isaac. And the rabbis go on to say, well, what's the deal? Why is Abraham called Zaken, the word meaning old, when before Abraham, you've got, well, for starters, you've got Noah, who lives to be 600 some odd years old. You've got Adam, 929 years old. Methuselah, the oldest man in the Bible, 969 years old. None of them is called old. Abraham, at the age of 100, however, is identified as a Zaken. And what the rabbis say is that Zaken is not just about chronological age, it's about veneration, right? Abraham had become a venerated man. So what I was saying though, is it is fascinating that 60 is associated with old age, but 70 is a similar biblical term, seva, which means fullness or satisfaction, contentment. And 80, gevurah, which is fascinating because it's related to the same word gibor that was associated with the lion in the previous Mishnah. So these are not the only one. It strikes the only ones are if you're 90 and 100, you really are past your prime in this framework. But it actually, one way of reading it is that each stage is actually even more honored or honorific than the previous. It's not a bad thing to be old in the Jewish tradition. I have one of my mentors, Rabbi Les Gutterman, has a whole riff on getting old. It's like, you're old when the glint in your eye is the sun on your trifocals. He has a whole bunch of them. You're old when your back goes out more often than you do. You're old when you sink your teeth into a nice juicy steak and they stay there. You're old when you spot your first gray hair on your child. There's a whole bunch of these funny riffs on being old. That's not what this is about. This is actually, there's a veneration of age but not just age, wisdom, Torah learning. If you are doing the thing you're supposed to be doing, which is being swift as a gazelle, an eagle, et cetera, to study Torah, and you've accumulated that much Torah by the time you're 80, why not identify that with the quality of gevura, of being a warrior? In my lived experience, by the way, people who are in their 90s, and especially people who make it to 100, rare is the person I've met who felt that his best days were the present or the future, who is over 100 years old. That's just some hard truth. Most people who reach extremes of age have buried most of the people they love, sometimes including their own children. They've surely, nobody gets to 100 without enduring some very serious suffering. Their bodies are not what they used to be. Their minds are often not what they used to be. But mostly what I hear is that they feel lonely and they wish that they had purpose or vigor, that they miss their loved ones, that they miss who they used to be, and that they would view death as a blessing. So we all dream of we all want long lives, I guess. But I've seen the downside of that. I don't know many people over 100 who are very, very happy. I mean, some of you may have known people or may know people like that. It's a struggle. I do funerals a lot for people, and when I bury people who are in their late 90s and hundreds, sometimes there's a sense of relief. They were ready for this already. Now, maybe that will change because medicine, nutrition, advances in technology are making it possible to live longer, though interestingly, over the last few years, largely accelerated or amplified by the COVID pandemic, life expectancy has diminished all over the globe, including in the United States. And in the US has never been, even in the top 5 or top 10 for life expectancy worldwide. If you want to live a long life, move to Liechtenstein or Sweden. They live a very long time. Let's hear a couple other thoughts. Judy, I've rambled at length. Your turn.
Yeah, after your rambling, which was very deep and emotional, I don't know. These are just very slight comments. One, just thinking about this in a couple of ways, these characteristics are aspirational in a way as you go up, and they're cumulative as you go up. So that I think once you reach attaining understanding at 40, you've been understanding for a while. It's just that by then you really you should be understanding. And once you've reached the time when you were giving counsel, you could have been giving counsel just as you have in your young life, but it's by then you really should be there already. It's like, and then of course I'm loving the 80-year-old strength because let's get some positive aspects here as we age. But then the very end, I think it's almost a warning.
Yeah.
Do this stuff while you're growing and you're learning and you're gaining understanding and gaining wisdom. It takes work and it takes aging to do all these things. You have to age.
Yeah.
And just be aware that at the end, you're not going to, at 100, you're not going to be here anymore in some ways, physically or not.
And so what are you going to invest in? How are you going to grow? I'm also not convinced that all of these things just attain themselves. The grammar of the syntax of this Mishnah is itself fascinating. It simply says, I'll bring it on screen so you can see it, because I think, Judy, it is directly prompted by your wise and thoughtful insights. Hu haya omer, he used to say, that's the beginning, ben chamesh shanim lamikra. Literally, the way they translate it is quite good. At 5 years for scripture. Well, what does that mean exactly? There's no verb. Ben chamesh shanim la mikra, ben eser la mishnah, ben shalosh esrei la mitzvot. There's no verb in any of these. Literally, the only verb we have so far is omer, which means to say. Ben chamesh esrei la talmud. It's just age, ben chamesh. The way you say an age of a person is you take a number and you put the word ben in front of it, literally son of. Okay, that's why bar mitzvah literally means son of commandment, but that's not a good translation. Bar or ben, bar is Aramaic for son of, the same way ben is Hebrew for son of. We also gender neutral or gender egalitarianize, gender equalize by using bat. Ben or bat just means son or daughter, but it also means eligible for. So ben chamesh, when you are eligible 5, it's just the idiomatic way in Hebrew in antiquity as today. You want to say, ben kama ata, how old are you? Like literally, son of how much you? Nobody would say that. They don't. Israelis don't hear it that way. Ben kama ata, how old are you? Ani, ben arba'im v'tesha. I'm 49. But there's no verb. Age, preposition, l, meaning for or to or unto, and then noun. Age, preposition, noun. At 5 or at 15, for Talmud. At 18, for the chuppah. At 20, lirdof, it just says to pursue or to have a pursuit, a vocation. Ben shloshim lakoach, at 34, strength. At 44, understand. By the way, I'm noticing this for the first time, so I'm fascinated. I'm waiting for a verb. Ben chamishim, at 54, counsel. Ben shishim lazikna, for the venerated old age. Ben shivim laseva, at 70, for contentment or fullness of age. Ben shmonim lagvura, thank you, Judy, at 80, for strength or, heroism. Ben tishim lasuach, which literally actually means, lasuach is interesting. It could mean a sense of languishing. Here's the thing. I'm noticing for this for the first time. Lasuach also means to engage in discourse, to have a conversation. The Hebrew word for conversation is siach. So I don't know if lasuach means to have a bent body. I'm not buying it. I'm going to look into that one. Ben mea Ke'ilu mate, there's the only verb in the whole thing. I found it. Dead, to die. V'avar, and to pass. Uvatel, and to be annulled. Min haolam, from this existence. Norm first, then Rob and Aaron, and then Michelle, and then we'll think some concluding thoughts and have a wonderful weekend and return to our study in a week. Norm, please.
Yeah, just very quickly, Rabbi. Ben Gurion in English was referred to as the old man. In Hebrew, he was Hasakim, which is a much nicer way to put it, as you said.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, old man, it's really unfortunate. Old man is almost always pejorative, even if it's not the worst thing you can say about a person who's reached a certain age or stage of life. Now the worst thing you can say is, okay, boomer. Right. Oh man, is there a worse insult? Okay, anyway, thank you, Norm. Rob and Aaron, please.
I found it interesting that for me, what I perceive as one of the most important things in Judaism is teaching your children and having children and creating or like growing the next generation or the tribe of Israel. I couldn't think of the right word. They don't mention that specifically in this. And I guess I'm kind of surprised by that. It's all individual qualities. It's not about the necessarily like that same legacy.
Thank you. There's so much that's missing from this text, and I'm only noticing it for the first time. And this is why studying a text like Pirkei Avot, which, is one of those ones you can return to again and again, which will be where we pick up next week, the idea of turning it again and again, probably not the most famous, but again, one of the Pirkei Avot greatest hits text, Ben Bagbag, who says, turn it and turn it again, for everything is in it. Well, that's true of this text, is it not? That, every time you come back to it, you find something new. And what is not in this text, at least for me today, Thursday, October 20th, 2022, is much more interesting than what's in the text. I've read this text countless times, but I've never noticed before all the things that aren't in it. Like, how do you get the things that you are supposed to be eligible to attain? There is no mention of the obligation to teach I'm going to go even beyond that. It's like, I can't get past the fact, I'm kind of giddy with excitement over my observation that you don't have any verbs until the end. What a crazy text. At 5:4 scripture. At 5 what? Who's supposed to do something when you're 5? No 5-year-old. Okay, a 5-year-old is ready for scripture. That makes sense. But it doesn't actually say that either. At 5 years old, a parent must take their child to the study hall. That's how it's been interpreted, but it's much more ambiguous than that. Who is obligated? What does this all mean? How can you write a paragraph with no verbs until the last line? The grammar nerd in me is having a field day with this, but it's gonna give me a lot to think about. What exactly is being proposed here? Or is it simply saying, as Judy says, at this point in your life, you've already been doing this for a while. Now you are either authorized or commended for having attained a certain stage. But that's a lot to assume about the word le, which means for, the preposition. The preposition says everything and nothing here. Michelle Braun, you're going to be our last student commenter for the day, and I'll have literally one line to conclude.
I promise nothing profound, but also, grammar nerd here. I was trained to write in full paragraphs, full thoughts, fully articulated, especially when I worked in the public sector and what we said was public and permanent, and really clearly articulated in writing thoughts. When I left that and started working more with consulting, they wanted bullet points. And this reads to me like very modern bullet points. We have one little, on the PowerPoint, one little thing at the top and a bunch of bullets, and they are less fully articulated written thoughts. And you could argue that that permits more room for more scope for imagination and interpretation.
It's beautiful. That's more profound than you give yourself credit for being.
So that you have it that way. Just to add that none of these are going to follow everything, but in response to one of your final comments, it occurs to me, in drawing, one of the ways that we define a picture is to start with what's called the negative space, which is not an outline of the image, not the positive, what I want ultimately may or may not want you to see, but in fact, the area around that and what you'd think of as the image being captured emerges from that.
Love that. Joe? Oh, unmute.
Just a quickie. My son-in-law is English, and he and his father are of this older generation. And the word they use that sort of in a friendly way, in a sort of comical way. And I've heard the word used here also, but they use it more in England. The word for us is geezer.
Yeah. The British have such colorful ways of really taking each other down. Sometimes that can be said affectionately.
I don't mind being an old geezer.
Okay, well, that's nice. I think overall, despite the last line, which I'm glad that Barbara started us there with how blunt it is that it's like you're canceled, not in the modern sense in which that term is now being used so frequently, but that your very existence is annulled. Despite that, each of the ages and stages of life that are identified, I think actually are viewed through a positive lens. That it is that up until you're on the brink of death, A, you're not irrelevant. B, you're not in the pejorative sense a geezer or an old man. You actually have merely attained a different stage of life marked by different qualities, different opportunities, perhaps some things that cannot be recaptured once they are in the rearview mirror. But the through line, of course, is what we've been talking about all day, which is the centrality of a relationship with Torah. So that's a lovely way to end. Very grateful for all of your insights and participation today. It's a beautiful day, so please don't spend it all inside. We convene again Thursday morning, same Zoom link. You may not see me on the Bima for a couple Fridays now, just because I'm traveling for work. I have the confirmation 10th grade retreat this weekend in Eisner. But if you are a fan of Cantor Rodnizky and our cantorial intern Isaac Sana Asor, they'd love to see you at services. We're moving back indoors because of the temperature. So just please be advised that services this weekend, presumably going forward, unless it is unseasonably warm on a Friday afternoon, will be in the sanctuary. And then the following 2 weekends, I have weddings out of town with wonderful couples who are over 18. Have a wonderful day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yasher koach, John.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
Well, thanks again.
Thank you.